When you reach the age of 9 years old, the universe surrounding you ceased to be a simple, innocent playground constructed of bright sunlight, carefree neighborhood games, and uncomplicated childhood laughter. Instead, your reality slowly morphed into a complex, profound, and often bewildering psychological landscape. You found yourself standing precisely at the fragile, invisible intersection of two completely opposite dimensions of human existence. These two distinct worlds were not separated by vast, insurmountable oceans or towering physical walls of stone, but rather by the deeply ingrained, fundamental philosophies of the two massive figures who dominated your young life. Destiny had placed you in an extraordinarily unique and challenging position. You were a young boy caught directly between the gravitational pulls of two profoundly different fathers. On one side of this invisible boundary stood Mr. Mark, your biological father. He was a man of immense intellect, quiet dignity, and unwavering moral principles. When you looked at him, you saw the very embodiment of the traditional, highly educated, and thoroughly structured system. He was a dedicated, lifelong scholar, a man who had spent many long, arduous years inside the safe, ordered halls of higher academia in order to earn a prestigious master degree. His daily life was governed by a strict sense of order, a deep ethical compass, and an absolute, passionate belief in the righteousness of honest, hard work, performed within the established boundaries of society. He served the public education system with a loyal, tired, and deeply honorable devotion. He trusted implicitly that the massive, complex machinery of the government and the corporate world would eventually reward his faithful, lifelong service with a quiet, respectable security. On the exact opposite side of your daily reality stood Mr. Julian, the father of your best friend, Mike. He was the man who would eventually become a guiding, adoptive father figure to you in the specific realm of financial philosophy. Mr. Julian existed as the absolute, mirror opposite of everything your biological father represented. He possessed no framed academic degrees upon his walls. In fact, he had never even completed the 8th grade of middle school education. Yet, when you looked at his rough, heavily calloused hands and the intense, constantly calculating spark dancing in his sharp eyes, you felt the heavy, undeniable presence of a raw, untamed, and entirely self-made power. Mr. Julian did not patiently serve the traditional system. He actively observed it, manipulated its heavy levers, and relentlessly built his own independent empires far outside of its traditional, comfortable constraints. He was an entrepreneur, a merchant, and a risk-taker, a man who navigated the treacherous, highly unpredictable currents of modern commerce and private capital with a restless, predatory grace. Both of these imposing, powerful men were highly successful in their own chosen arenas of life. Both of them commanded a deep, genuine respect from their professional peers, their neighbors, and their respective communities. Both men loved you with a fierce, protective, and overwhelming intensity, and both held an uncompromising, passionate belief in the absolute necessity of continued learning and education. However, the exact nature of the education they constantly preached to you was violently, fundamentally different. Whenever they offered you their earnest guidance on how you should navigate the long, uncertain future, their spoken words collided in the air around you like massive, tectonic plates, slowly grinding against one another. If you had been born with only one father to guide you, your childhood development would have remained comfortably numb and wonderfully uncomplicated. You would have simply absorbed his singular, dominant worldview without a single moment of internal question. You would have passively accepted his personal beliefs as the absolute, undeniable truths of the universe. Or perhaps, as you grew older, you would have blindly rebelled against them in a sudden surge of predictable teenage defiance. But standing directly in the crossfire of their perfectly opposing philosophies, that easy, comforting luxury of passive acceptance was quietly stripped away from you. You could not simply close your eyes, nod your head, and blindly obey. Your developing, sensitive brain was forced into a permanent state of careful, uncomfortable vigilance. You began to watch their smallest, most insignificant daily movements. You began to listen closely to the subtle, hidden vibrations and meanings buried within their chosen vocabularies. You began to weigh the heavy, silent consequences of their daily actions and their deeply held beliefs. At the tender age of 9, long before you ever held a real paycheck in your hands or understood the complex mechanics of a bank account, you were forced to recognize a profound reality. The words and thoughts of these two men were actively forging two completely different human destinies right before your eyes. And the most confusing, beautiful part of this realization was that you did not look at one man as a hero and the other as a villain. You did not judge them. You did not attempt to declare that one father was absolutely right and the other father was completely wrong. You simply stood in the middle, a quiet, observant witness, listening to the distinct melodies of their separate lives and reflecting deeply on the completely different ways they chose to walk upon the earth. The profound realization of their differences did not arrive through a grand, dramatic revelation, but rather through a small, agonizingly mundane moment inside the quiet walls of your own family home. It was a warm, heavy afternoon. You had just run home from the local schoolyard, your young mind burning with the desperate, innocent desire of a normal child. Many of your classmates were excitedly talking about a brand new, rather expensive sporting kit, and you felt that familiar, hollow ache of wanting to belong to the group. You pushed open the heavy wooden door to your biological father's home study, stepping out of the bright, noisy reality of the afternoon sun and into the dim, hushed, almost sacred sanctuary of his academic life. The air inside Mr. Mark's study was always thick, trapped, and perfectly still. It smelled distinctly of aging paper, dry leather book bindings, and the sharp, metallic tang of the ink ribbon from his heavy mechanical typewriter. A single brass desk lamp cast a weak yellow pool of light across his cluttered workspace, illuminating the neat, endless stacks of educational reports, philosophical essays, and administrative documents. On the wall directly behind him, perfectly centered and framed in polished dark wood, hung his beautiful master degree. It was a pristine piece of parchment, a silent, proud testament to his brilliant intelligence and his complete, willing submission to the rigorous rules of the academic hierarchy. You walked up to the edge of his wooden desk, your heart hammering a rapid rhythm against your ribs, and timidly voiced your request for the money to buy the new sporting kit. The rhythmic, clattering sound of the heavy typewriter instantly ceased. The sudden silence in the room felt heavy, dense, and almost suffocating. Mr. Mark slowly lifted his long, elegant hands from the round keys. He leaned his tired back against the worn upholstery of his chair and let out a long, trembling, incredibly weary sigh. You watched as he brought his fingers up to gently massage his temples, attempting to rub away the chronic, invisible ache of a man who carried the heavy, noble burden of providing for a family while surviving from one completely inadequate government paycheck to the next. As he shifted his weight in the chair, your sharp, observant young eyes caught a tiny, almost hidden movement. His left hand hovered for a fraction of a second over a freshly opened envelope from the local utility company. The bright red ink of an overdue electric bill glared up aggressively from the white paper. With a swift, practiced, and almost ashamed motion, Mr. Mark slid the terrifying piece of paper underneath a thick stack of student essays, quietly burying the harsh reality of his financial distress beneath the comforting, familiar illusion of his intellectual labor. He looked down at you, his deep, intelligent eyes softening with a profound, helpless affection. He reached out and gently rested his hand upon the top of your head. His voice, when he finally spoke to you, was smooth, entirely devoid of anger, yet it carried the devastating, heavy weight of an absolute, peaceful surrender. He looked at you and said, "I cannot afford that." Those 5 simple words floated softly through the stale air of the quiet study and sank deep into your chest. When you dared to ask him why money always seemed to be such a painful, constant struggle in your house, his expression tightened with a familiar moral superiority. He delivered his ultimate defining philosophy, repeating the exact phrase he clung to like a protective religious scripture. He said, "The passionate love of money is the root of all human evil." You stood frozen on the woven rug, feeling a strange, uncomfortable knot twisting slowly inside your stomach. A terrifying paradox began to quietly unfold in your mind. You looked at the beautiful, framed master degree shining on the wall, and then you looked at the thick stack of papers deliberately hiding the red utility bill. You realized that all of his brilliant academic knowledge, all of his dedicated public service, and all of his perfect, beautiful grammar could not shield him from the quiet, humiliating terror of a simple piece of paper demanding a monetary payment. But as you stood there, reflecting on his words, you realized something else. You realized that he was not speaking out of cowardice or malice. The true essence of that moment lay in the physical and psychological transformation you witnessed. The exact second he uttered the words, "I cannot afford that," you felt a distinct shift in the energy of the room. The moment that definitive statement left his lips, his brain simply, peacefully shut down. The sentence acted upon him as a powerful, soothing, emotional narcotic. It was an absolute declaration of limit that instantly released him from the agonizing, burning pressure of having to think of a new solution. It gave him profound permission to stop struggling, to retreat back into the safe, familiar, and highly ethical comfort of his scholarly life. By declaring his inability, he effectively protected his soul from the greed and the endless grasping that he so deeply despised. He accepted his financial limits because, in his eyes, there were things in this life far more important, far more noble, and far more sacred than the endless pursuit of wealth. His peace was found in his acceptance of his boundaries. Unable to fully process the quiet, profound resignation of that dim study, you eventually left the house. You walked slowly through the neighborhood streets, the hot pavement burning gently beneath your worn canvas shoes, until you met up with Mike and reached the bustling, chaotic territory of Mr. Julian's family business. You and Mike pushed your way through the heavy swinging glass doors of Mr. Julian's primary office, leaving the quiet, academic resignation of your biological father far behind you in the distance. If Mr. Mark's study was a quiet, perfectly preserved museum of dead ideas and noble sacrifices, Mr. Julian's office was a loud, aggressive, constantly churning engine room of living, breathing reality. The environment completely assaulted your young senses. The air inside the building was thick and heavy with the bitter, sharp scent of dark roasted coffee, the faint, greasy odor of diesel fuel from the delivery trucks idling loudly in the alleyway outside, and the aggressive, rapid-fire ringing of heavy black rotary telephones. There were absolutely no framed academic degrees on these rough walls. There were only large, incredibly messy chalkboards, covered entirely in rapidly scribbled numbers, complex shipping schedules, and aggressive profit margins. Mr. Julian was sitting behind a massive, deeply scarred wooden desk. A telephone receiver was pinned awkwardly between his broad shoulder and his ear, and his thick, heavily calloused fingers were rapidly flipping through the pages of a wide, incredibly detailed financial ledger. You and Mike stood quietly before him, shifting nervously from foot to foot, waiting for him to notice you. When he finally slammed the heavy plastic receiver down onto its cradle, you both stammered out your desire for the expensive new sporting kit, instinctively mimicking the exact same passive language you had been carefully conditioned to use at your own home. You looked down at the dusty floorboards and mumbled softly, "We cannot afford it." The reaction from the man behind the desk was instantaneous, physical, and entirely explosive. Mr. Julian did not sigh. He did not gently rub his temples in a display of quiet, intellectual defeat. Instead, he brought the flat palm of his heavy, calloused hand down against the scratched surface of the wooden desk with a sharp, echoing crack. The sudden violent sound made both you and Mike jump in surprise. He leaned his entire upper body across the width of the desk, his broad, muscular shoulders effectively blocking out the bright light pouring in from the window behind him, and he locked his piercing, uncompromising eyes directly onto yours. He pointed a thick, commanding finger directly at your chest and delivered a strict, unbreakable, and absolute law. He said, "Never, ever, say you cannot afford something in my presence again." He demanded, with a fierce intensity, that you instantly erase that toxic, limiting sentence from your personal vocabulary. He forced you to lift your chin, to look directly back into his burning eyes, and to completely reformulate your passive statement of surrender into an aggressive, demanding, and active inquiry. He made you repeat the new phrase out loud, forcing the words from your throat. He made you ask, "How can I afford that?" The internal contrast between the two experiences was so violently stark that it made your young head spin. You felt an immediate, entirely physical jolt run straight up the length of your spine. The precise moment you replaced the passive statement with the active question, the comfortable, soothing numbness that had settled so gently over you in your biological father's study was violently ripped away. A question, you realized in that moment, absolutely refuses to let the human mind sleep. A question is an electric shock, a brutal, highly uncomfortable internal pressure that forcefully compels every single neural pathway in your brain to contract, to stretch, and to actively fire. By asking how, you were suddenly, mercilessly dragged out of the warm, safe blanket of victimhood and thrown directly into the cold, harsh, and incredibly demanding arena of absolute personal responsibility. Your young brain actually began to ache physically as it frantically searched for answers, for creative ways to generate new value, for undiscovered avenues to overcome the financial obstacle standing in your path. Mr. Julian slowly sat back down in his heavy chair, silently watching the complex wheels turning rapidly behind your widened eyes. He shook his head slowly, his voice dropping into a low, serious, rumbling tone. In one single breath, he completely shattered the moral foundation that your biological father had so carefully built for you over the years. He looked at you and said, "Mister, Mark genuinely thinks that loving money is evil. He has a right to his opinion, but he is completely wrong. The constant, grinding, humiliating, and desperate lack of money is the true root of all human evil. It destroys loving marriages, it breaks the human spirit, it breeds terrible crime, and it forces perfectly good, honest men to live their entire lives in a state of quiet, desperate, and paralyzing fear." In that loud, coffee-stained, incredibly messy office, you experienced a profound, internal shifting of the earth. You realized that language was not merely a simple tool used for basic communication, it was the invisible, foundational architecture of human destiny. Mr. Julian deliberately used words not to peacefully explain his limits, but to brutally, continuously tear them down. He completely embraced the anxiety and the pain of thinking, because he firmly believed that mental sweat and constant, relentless effort was the only true currency that could ever purchase absolute freedom. He did not seek peace, he sought expansion. He did not want to protect his soul by hiding from the world of money. He wanted to conquer the world of money so that his family would never have to bow their heads to anyone. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, the agonizing, fascinating stretch between these two entirely opposing universes became most apparent when the hot sun went down and the respective families gathered around their evening dining tables. The nightly meals transformed into parallel, deeply engaging classrooms, where the contrasting blueprints for your entire future were carefully laid out before your hesitant, constantly observing eyes. Imagine, for a moment, sitting at the small, neatly set dining table with Mr. Mark. The atmosphere in the room was always calm, highly respectable, and heavily coated in the pleasant illusion of middle-class safety. One evening, after the dinner plates were cleared away and the table was wiped clean, Mr. Mark brought out a crisp, perfectly typed piece of white paper. His gentle eyes beamed with a genuine, profound pride as he showed you the professional resume he had just spent 3 full hours meticulously crafting for a struggling, unemployed colleague. He placed his slender finger gently on the perfectly aligned margins, the elegant font, and the absolutely flawless grammatical structure of the document. He looked at you across the table and delivered his ultimate, carefully considered strategy for your survival in the world. He said, "You must study as hard as you possibly can, secure the absolute highest grades in your class, and learn to write a flawless, brilliant resume exactly like this one. If you do that, a great, powerful, and highly respected corporation will eventually hire you, and you will be safe for the rest of your natural life." He then gestured warmly around the modest, warmly lit living room, his voice swelling with the deep satisfaction of a man who firmly believed he had played the game of life exactly as the rules demanded. He declared with absolute certainty, "This house is my greatest personal achievement. It is the absolute largest asset I will ever own, and it is the solid, unshakable foundation of our family wealth." He believed it. He truly, deeply believed it. And as you listened to him, you did not feel the urge to correct him or to judge his perspective. You simply saw a man who valued safety, community, and the quiet dignity of a stable existence. You saw a man who believed that if everyone simply did their job properly, the world would be a fair and just place. Furthermore, his integrity was absolute. You knew this because, later that exact same night, long after the rest of the house had fallen asleep, you crept down the dark hallway and peered quietly into the kitchen. Mr. Mark sat completely alone in the dark, hunched entirely over a small, glowing calculator, a pile of assorted, demanding bills scattered before him like a tragic deck of cards. He was meticulously, painfully subtracting his required living expenses from his meager, fixed government salary. He always, without a single exception, paid his bills first. He paid his creditors before he paid himself. It was a point of absolute honor for him to maintain his pristine credit and his highly respectable public image. By the time he finally reached the bottom line of the ledger, there was absolutely nothing left for him, nothing left for his future investments, and nothing left for his personal joy. He was exhausted, drained completely dry by the very system he faithfully worshipped, yet he went to sleep with a clear, untroubled conscience, knowing he owed nothing to any man. That was his chosen path. That was his honorable truth. The very next afternoon, the scene shifted entirely. You found yourself sitting on a hard, uncomfortable wooden stool in the dusty, echoing back room of Mr. Julian's massive storage warehouse. There were absolutely no perfectly typed, grammatically flawless resumes to be found anywhere in this building. Instead, Mr. Julian forcefully unrolled a large, incredibly messy, hand-drawn blueprint covered in aggressive red marker lines across a slanted drafting table. It was the detailed financial projection for a failing local convenience store that he was currently plotting to aggressively acquire, restructure, and turn around for a massive profit. He tapped his thick, calloused finger heavily against the paper, his loud voice cutting easily through the constant, chaotic noise of the busy warehouse. He said, "I absolutely do not want you to spend your time learning how to write a pretty resume so that you can beg for a job from a giant corporation. I want you and Mike to learn how to write a massive, bulletproof, incredibly detailed business plan so that you can buy the corporation itself and provide jobs for the millions of people who are too terrified to ever build their own dreams." When you innocently mentioned your biological father's immense pride in the family home, Mr. Julian let out a harsh, unsympathetic, and entirely practical laugh. He leaned down over the table, his face turning completely serious and highly intense. He warned you, speaking slowly so that every single word would register in your brain. He said, "If your personal residence is the absolute largest financial investment you ever make in your entire life, you are walking blindly into a devastating, inescapable trap. A house is not an asset unless it puts physical cash directly into your pocket every single month. Your father's beautiful house only takes money out of his pocket. It requires endless maintenance, taxes, and mortgage interest. It is a massive liability brilliantly disguised as the ultimate American dream." He then leaned closer and revealed the most terrifying, counterintuitive, and brilliant secret of his massive financial power. He explained carefully that unlike Mr. Mark, he absolutely, fundamentally refused to ever pay his bills first. He always, without a single moment of hesitation, paid himself and funded his personal investment accounts before paying a single dime to his waiting creditors. When the banks called, when the pressure mounted, and when the absolute terror of mounting debt threatened to crush him, he did not cower and he did not dip into his savings. Instead, he used the intense, burning, agonizing anxiety of the unpaid bills to forcefully stimulate his brain. He used the pressure to make himself hustle harder, to invent entirely new streams of creative income, and to aggressively expand his empire. He literally weaponized his own fear, turning the sheer terror of debt into his supreme, unstoppable motivation for massive wealth creation. You sat silently on the wooden stool, feeling your young, impressionable mind stretch, pull, and tear in two completely different directions. Two men, two dinner tables, two completely distinct, entirely valid designs for living a human life. One man sought desperately to shrink his desires to fit comfortably inside a safe, predictable, and highly ethical cage. The other man intentionally, repeatedly set himself on fire so that he would be absolutely forced to build an ocean of wealth just to put the flames out. You listened to both. You absorbed both. You judged neither. You simply allowed their contrasting philosophies to echo within the deep chambers of your mind. The heavy, theoretical lessons shared so passionately over quiet dinner tables and messy drafting boards were eventually dragged out into the brutal, unforgiving, and blinding light of reality when a catastrophic, highly unexpected economic crisis finally struck the region. It was a chaotic, devastating season when a massive, highly leveraged real estate development deal, carefully structured over many years by Mr. Julian, violently and spectacularly collapsed. The local housing market shifted unexpectedly. The promised bank financing vanished literally overnight, and the entire massive project imploded upon itself, dragging nearly all of his liquid capital and available cash down into the dark abyss with it. The shocking news of the severe financial disaster rippled rapidly through the small town, quickly reaching the quiet, entirely safe, and thoroughly insulated confines of Mr. Mark's home. You stood quietly in the kitchen doorway and carefully watched your biological father's reaction to the sudden ruin of another man. Mr. Mark stood peacefully by the stove, holding his warm morning cup of tea in both hands. He was slowly, deliberately shaking his head from side to side with a deep, tragic, and entirely genuine sense of intellectual validation. There was absolutely no joy or malice in his voice, only the heavy, somewhat depressing comfort of a cautious man whose deepest, darkest fears had just been proven absolutely, undeniably correct by the harsh mechanics of the world. He looked at you, his eyes filled with a sad wisdom, and delivered a chilling, incredibly fatalistic monologue. He whispered softly into the quiet kitchen, "This is exactly why I never take wild risks. This is why I deliberately chose the slow path of the government pension and the highly secure, reliable paycheck. Julian reached far too high, he became far too greedy, and now he is completely ruined. The aggressive world of money is simply too dangerous and too unpredictable. I know my proper place in this world. I know that I will never be a rich man, and I have made my profound, lasting peace with that reality. As those final words left his mouth and drifted into the air, you saw the invisible, iron bars of his self-constructed mental prison slam definitively and permanently shut. His quiet statement, "I will never be a rich man," was not a mere, objective observation of his current bank balance. It was a dark, binding, and incredibly powerful personal prophecy. It was a completely self-fulfilling curse that absolutely guaranteed he would never, ever attempt to take a single step beyond the invisible, heavily fortified boundaries of his own paralyzing fear. Yet, you also saw the genuine, undeniable peace that washed over his face as he accepted his fate. He was content. He was safe. He had chosen his path, and the universe had obliged him by keeping him exactly where he had asked to remain. Terrified by the abstract concept of total ruin, you immediately ran across the town to check on Mike, fully expecting to find the large warehouse permanently shuttered and the aggressive, previously unstoppable Mr. Julian utterly, hopelessly broken by the crushing weight of his massive failure. When you pushed your way through the heavy doors of his main office, the atmosphere inside was undeniably tense, chaotic, and incredibly heavy. The numerous telephones were ringing constantly with the angry, demanding voices of panicked creditors, and the towering stacks of unpaid invoices covering the desk were absolutely mountainous. Mr. Julian was standing alone by the large glass window, his expensive suit jacket discarded carelessly on the floor, his white shirt sleeves rolled aggressively up past his thick elbows. The entire back of his shirt was completely soaked through with the cold, damp sweat of intense, crushing, and almost unbearable financial stress. He looked significantly older, his shoulders carrying the immense, invisible physical weight of millions of dollars seemingly evaporating into thin air. Yet, when he slowly turned around to face you and Mike, his spine was perfectly, rigidly straight. His sharp eyes were absolutely not filled with the dull, glassy, and peaceful resignation you had just witnessed in Mr. Mark. His eyes were burning with an intense, furious, incredibly calculating, and almost frightening fire. He was pacing back and forth across the wooden floor like a wounded, highly dangerous, and entirely cornered predator that absolutely refused, under any circumstances, to simply lay down and quietly die. When Mike looked up with tears in his eyes and quietly asked his father if they were now officially poor, Mr. Julian immediately stopped his frantic pacing. He walked slowly over to the two of you, knelt down so that he was exactly eye level with your young faces, and delivered a profound truth that would endlessly echo in the deep corridors of your soul for the rest of your natural life. He said, his voice fierce, deep, and completely unyielding, "Listen to me very carefully. There is a massive, fundamental, and incredibly important difference between being broke and being poor. We have temporarily lost our investment capital. We are currently, completely, and entirely broke. But being broke is a strictly temporary, physical condition of the wallet. Being poor is a permanent, terminal, and completely incurable disease of the human mind. I have lost my money today, but I have absolutely not lost my mind. I am still a rich man, and a rich man does not ever stay on his knees. The heavy impact of that raw, intensely emotional moment hit you with the staggering force of a speeding freight train. You stared deeply at his sweat-soaked shirt, you looked into his burning, relentless eyes, and you finally, truly understood the ultimate, hidden secret of the universe. Wealth and poverty were absolutely not measured by the ink numbers printed on a fragile piece of paper or by the temporary balance held securely inside a concrete bank vault. They were, in fact, absolute, defining states of human consciousness. Mr. Mark, despite having a reliable, steady salary, a beautiful, comfortable home, and a truly flawless academic record, was permanently, incurably poor because his brilliant mind was entirely infected with the quiet disease of surrender. Yet, at the exact same time, he was deeply, beautifully rich in his morality, his family love, and his intellectual peace. Mr. Julian, despite standing directly in the absolute, smoking wreckage of a massive financial catastrophe with hostile, angry creditors screaming at him on the telephone, was permanently, undeniably rich because his mind remained a relentless, unbreakable fortress of aggressive creation. Yet, his life was constantly burdened by extreme stress, endless risk, and the heavy, exhausting weight of his own massive ambitions. The steady accumulation of these profound, psychological observations brought you to the ultimate, defining crossroads of your young existence. You were merely 9 years old, a small, quiet child who, by all rights, should have been concerned only with the simple, joyful mechanics of playground games and innocent schoolyard friendships. Instead, you found yourself standing completely alone in the quiet, shadowed hallway of your family home, staring deeply at the closed wooden door of Mr. Mark's dim, paper-scented study, and thinking about the loud, chaotic office of Mr. Julian located across the town. You did not judge them. You did not look at the closed door and feel hatred, and you did not look toward the town and feel blind worship. You simply understood, with a terrifying, absolute clarity, that you were currently observing two men who were perfectly, flawlessly executing the exact philosophies they had chosen to believe. You realized that words are not just sounds. They are heavy, magical incantations that slowly build the exact reality they describe. Mr. Mark said he would never be rich, and the universe respectfully bowed to his request, wrapping him in a safe, tight, and limited embrace. Mr. Julian said he was a rich man even when he had nothing, and the universe respectfully bowed to his demand, throwing him into the chaotic, painful, but incredibly expansive arena of endless creation. You stood in the hallway, taking a deep, slow breath, filling your small lungs with the quiet air of your childhood home. You did not know which path was ultimately better. You did not know if the quiet peace of the poor dad was superior to the burning fire of the rich dad. The only thing you knew, with absolute, unshakable certainty, was that you had to choose a set of words for yourself. The universe was waiting to hear what you would say. And as you stood there, listening to the faint, steady clicking of the typewriter on one side, and imagining the loud, aggressive ringing of the telephones on the other, you realized that the story was not about right or wrong. It was simply about listening, reflecting, and eventually, becoming exactly what you choose to believe.